What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we have another versus. This time we're going to be comparing three very popular MMOs, Albion Online, Old School Runescape, and Runescape 3. This is one I wanted to do because I've always been told that Albion is very similar to Runescape, and I wanted to see how similar they were. So let's go ahead and get started with the game models. Albion Online is free to play. All you have to do is go to your respective store like Steam, download it, and you're in. Now, the good thing about their free-to-play model is that you can experience the whole game without any restrictions. Well, let me take that back. There is one thing you don't get as a free-to-play player, and that's your own island, which is for housing. Other than that, you don't have to worry about your bag space being limited or being able to run like 5 dungeons a day or something crappy like that. So Albion Online does have a premium service, which is very beneficial and will most certainly allow you to progress faster than a non-premium player. Some things included in the premium service are extra learning points, which will allow you to finish leveling up a skill once you've hit a certain threshold of XP, extra focus, which allows you to craft more with less materials, and plus 50% fame, which is basically XP that you need to level up. And there's a bunch of other benefits you get as well. Now, premium can be bought at a minimum of 7 days of game time for $5 US. I think the standard most will probably buy is 30 days, which will run you $16 a month. The good thing about Albion Online is that the membership can be bought in-game with the premium currency gold, and if you're good at the game, you won't have to spend $1. So there's two ways to earn gold. You can buy it with your hard-earned real-life cash, or you can exchange the silver you make in-game for gold. Also, you can do the exact opposite by spending real-world money on gold and then converting that to the in-game currency silver. With that being said, we're not going to get into the debate of if this game is pay to win or not. The next part of Albion's model is the cash shop, and it really only consists of vanity items, things like skins, mounts, and starter bundles, stuff like that. And that sums up the game model for Albion. Let's check out RuneScape. So before I start, I'm going to group Old School RuneScape and RuneScape 3 together as their models are pretty much identical. I'll be sure to call out any key differences when there are some. Now, both versions of RuneScape have a free-to-play model. You can grab it by going to RuneScape's official website or downloading it on Steam. Where they differ from Albion is that you do not get the entire game as a free-to-play player. RuneScape's free-to-play model is generous and you should have an idea on if you want to grab a membership or not, but here are some of the limitations as a free-to-play player. Most of the game map is limited. You are not able to access and level certain skills. You can't play on some servers. Lots of activities are unavailable to you, and there are a few more. So let's say you try RuneScape and you enjoy it and you want to grab the membership. What does that look like? Well, the membership is going to run you $13 a month. Something worth mentioning is that your membership does count towards both games, so you don't have to buy 2 memberships. Now, similarly to Albion, membership can be bought in-game with gold. You don't have to worry about a premium currency here. RuneScape only uses its in-game currency. So what you would do is take your in-game gold and buy what's called a bond, and one bond will grant you 14 days of membership. Conversely, you can buy bonds off of the RuneScape shop and sell them in-game for gold. Let's talk cash shops. This is where Old School RuneScape and RuneScape 3 mainly differ. Old School RuneScape, you really don't have anything to worry about as there are no loot boxes, skins, progression items, and things like that. Now, RuneScape 3, on the other hand, offers RuneScape coins, which will allow you to buy all sorts of things from skins to emotes, titles, pets, and more. The next thing is treasure hunter keys, which will open up loot boxes. In those loot boxes, you have things ranging from XP boosts to training dummies, which trains your skills, and a few more. And that's really the main difference in the models of Old School RuneScape and RuneScape 3. But as a whole, that wraps up the game models for all 3 games. Let's jump into the game world. Albion's world looks great. It's really colorful, has multiple biomes for a change of scenery, and has some of the most populated world towns I think I've ever seen in any MMO. First, I wanted to mention that the world is broken up into different zones and has loading screens leading from one zone to the next. I know this can be a big deal for some people due to the immersion, that's why I wanted to mention it. Not to get too into it right now, but you should know that Albion is a PvP-centric game, and that plays a big role in the game world. See, Albion's world is broken up into zones, and each zone is color-coded. A zone will either be blue, yellow, red, or black. So what does that mean? Well, blue is a friendly zone, which means no PvP can take place, which are the safest zones. Yellow zones offer moderate risk where you can be PvP'd by a player if they are flagged, and if you die you don't lose any of your items, instead you get right back up after a few seconds. Red zones feature full loot PvP, and if you die you do drop all of your items. Something to note is that yellow and red zones will indicate how many flagged PvPers are in that zone. And then you have black zones, which are the riskiest as players are not required to flag and you get no indication of how many hostile players are there. Oh, and that's full loot PvP as well. So now that we know that, each zone is broken up into one of 5 biomes: forest, highland, mountain, steppe, swamp. Now these zones don't do anything overly different from one another. The main reason to travel to a different biome is to gather resources. An example of this is if you want to mine ore, you'll head to a mountain themed zone, and if you want a zone that has more trees as its primary resource, you'll head to a forest zone. Each zone also has a tier associated with it going all the way up to tier 8, and as a result of that, if you want the highest tier of materials, you'll have to head to the more dangerous zone. Some other things you'll do and find in the world are craft and gather resources, find and complete dungeons, world bosses, and things like that. So my take on the game world of Albion is just okay. Personally, I feel the world doesn't really have much to offer outside of the main towns, besides resources and a couple of dungeons. You won't find NPCs out and about to talk to or anything like that. You don't see quest markers or other extracurricular activities to do, or just novelty experiences to get into. And that just about sums up the game world in Albion and some of the activities you'll do. Let's go check out RuneScape. Like I did with the models, I'm going to go ahead and group these together because both games essentially do the same thing when it comes to the world and world building. As always, I will call out any major differences between the two. So let's start with the visuals. This is where things differ from old school RuneScape and RuneScape 3. Old school RuneScape visually may not be appealing to many. It looks dated, you have very limited draw distances, your color palette isn't the sharpest, and I could probably go on. Now, don't get me wrong, the world does have a lot going for it, a ton of varied environments, and to me, it just has a charm about it. On the other hand, RuneScape 3 has continued to be updated, remodeled, and overhauled graphically to try to fit in with modern games. Now, RuneScape 3 visually will not blow you away, but it's serviceable in my opinion. It's very colorful, it features multiple biomes, and the textures and details are vastly improved over old school RuneScape. Now, old school RuneScape and RuneScape 3 does boast a seamless open world experience for the most part. It offers a sandbox experience from the get-go, giving the player the ability to go anywhere in the world for the most part. Now, Albion does this too, however, it seems less beneficial in Albion to travel to some of the later areas of the map because chances are you'll get PvP'd. This is something RuneScape doesn't have to worry about because PvP takes place in specific areas of the map. Now, the world in RuneScape is not set up like Albion's. See, Albion's world is fundamentally set up to support the type of game it is, which is PvP and crafting primarily. RuneScape's world isn't broken up into one of 5 biomes, instead it's just an organic world that has been crafted over time and continues to expand to give the players more adventures to go on. And that's the basis of RuneScape's world. It wants to send the player out on an adventure to explore and complete things. RuneScape's world is set up with a PvEer in mind. Some other things you'll do and find in the world are quest, craft and gather different resources, level your skills, do events, and pretty much whatever else you can think of. So my take of RuneScape's world is good. Personally, I'm one who likes the idea of adventure, and RuneScape offers that. Not only that, but the world just feels more alive. It has an explorability that you really can't get in Albion Online. And that'll do it for the world in old school RuneScape and RuneScape 3. Now that we've checked out the world for all 3 games, let's jump into combat. Albion Online has a soft targeting action combat. I would say it's relative to modern combat and MMOs. You select your target and your character will continue to do basic auto attacks as long as you're within range of the enemy. Combat is broken up into 3 archetypes: melee, ranged, and magic, each having their own distinct weapons and abilities. Speaking of abilities, you will have a total of 6 ability slots to use. Now, the abilities you choose to equip are dependent on whatever weapons and armor you equip. So let me give you an example. Let's say I equip a longbow. That longbow has 3 abilities I can choose from for my ability slot 1, and the same thing for my ability slot 2 and 3. Now, the other 3 ability slots, 4, 5, and 6, function the same way as your weapon does, but with armor instead. It's not an overly deep system, but it does offer great build variety when you start to consider that weapons and armors have different abilities attached to them. As far as weapon go, Albion Online does offer a great variety to choose from. You have things like gauntlets, crossbows, halberds, magic staves, and many more. Now, armor is broken up between heavy, medium, and light. Like most games, heavy armor will provide you with the most protection, while light gives you the best damage buffs, and medium is the middle ground. The cool thing about Albion is that you can mismatch armor, equip any weapon, and come up with whatever build you can think of for the most part. My take on Albion's combat is that it's pretty good. To me, it's very simple and straightforward, and I enjoy the amount of flexibility it allows to try new things. I didn't find fighting enemies or players an annoyance, in fact the exact opposite. When I found myself pulling off timely dodge abilities to avoid damage or big attacks, it felt good. So that wraps up the combat for Albion. Let's go check out Old School Runescape. So for this section, I am going to split up Old School RuneScape and RuneScape 3 because fundamentally the combat is completely different. However, all the elements that surround combat are more or less the same. So Old School RuneScape's combat is as traditional as it gets. It's a turn-based auto-attacking system that will see you and the enemy take turns hitting each other until one of you lose all of your health first. Now there is a bit more nuance to it than just that. Weapons and stats play a big role in how things turn out. An example of this is a player using a scimitar versus a player using a greatsword, or enemy. The player using the scimitar will have an attack rate that will be much faster, allowing for more hits to take place in a shorter amount of time, while the greatsword player will be much slower but has the chance to do higher damage per hit. Now, outside of the auto-attacking, Old School RuneScape doesn't really have abilities like Albion and RuneScape 3. The closest thing they get to that are weapons that have a special attack, or if you're using magic, technically you get abilities, but I wouldn't say it's the same. Now, combat in RuneScape is broken up like Albion into 3 archetypes, and that's melee, ranged, and magic. Melees will be using anything from daggers to battle axes, while ranged players will be able to use things like bows, crossbows, throwing knives, and more. And the magic players will be able to use things like staves and wands, and a slew of spells to choose from. Armor is broken up into light, medium, and heavy, with each having pros and cons. It's like a triangle. See, magic has the advantage over heavy, heavy has the advantage over ranged, and ranged has the advantage over magic. It's something worth mentioning because some enemies deal magic damage or one of the other damage types. However, Old School RuneScape does allow you to mismatch your armor and equip any weapon you like as long as you have the skill levels to do so. My take on Old School RuneScape's combat is that it's good, not an overly complicated system by any means, and I find it satisfying when you hit an enemy for a really big number. Now that we've talked combat for Old School RuneScape and Albion, let's check out RuneScape 3. RuneScape 3's combat is an evolution of Old School RuneScape, and it's continued to evolve and evolve. Now, RuneScape 3's combat mimics more modern turn-based combat. While the root of the combat is the same, which is that turn-based auto-attacking, RuneScape 3 has implemented skills into the game, something that you would see in World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV. Due to that, it adds an extra layer of combat that Old School RuneScape doesn't have, and I would even say it goes a bit further than Albion Online. Skills range from all different types. You'll use abilities to root the enemy, deal bonus damage, and more. You'll be managing anywhere from 10 to 15 abilities at a time. Your abilities are determined by what you have equipped. So if you are equipped with a melee weapon, your ability bar will reflect that. Same goes for magic or ranged. All of your abilities will be the same regardless of what weapon archetype you have equipped, so you won't see any changes to your melee abilities switching from an axe to a sword. Now, you may have picked up on this already, but RuneScape 3 is broken up into the same as the other two, which is melee, ranged, and magic archetypes. Melee weapons will see you using swords, whips, and more. One addition here over Old School RuneScape is the ability to dual wield some weapons. Ranged weapons will grant you access to glaives, crossbows, blow darts, and things like that. And magic will have you using staves, spellbooks, wands, and some pretty cool magic abilities. As for armor, it follows the same logic as Old School RuneScape, heavy, medium, and light. Magic has the advantage over heavy, heavy has the advantage over ranged, and so on. Like the other two, creativity is your best friend. RuneScape 3 allows you to mold your character however you want when it comes to combat and doesn't put many limitations on you. My take on RuneScape 3's combat is pretty good. I feel the abilities add a bit more depth to the gameplay, and it allows for more varied enemy designs to take advantage of it. Alright, now that combat is out of the way, let's see what content these games have to offer. Albion Online does a good job with its content offering. It offers a blend of PvP and PvE, although I would say the game is definitely more PvP focused. For my PvE players, if you are into dungeons and crafting, you'll feel right at home because they have an abundance of it. For my PvP players, if you like small scale, large scale, open world, PvP invasions, this will be for you. Let's talk PvE first. Dungeons are one of the primary forms of PvE content. They appear randomly in any zone. They are normally in one of 4 formats: solo, group, large, and Avalonian. Solos are generally scaled for 1 to 2 players, while group dungeons are scaled for 3 to 5 players. While the large scale dungeons are scaled for 6+, and Avalonian is designed for 20 players. Most of these dungeons will consist of you fighting through mobs, doing mechanics, and beating several bosses. Let's get into gathering and crafting. This is where the meat and potatoes are when it comes to PvE. All weapons, armor, mounts, anything that you can think of just about comes from you or another player crafting it and selling it. It starts with you gathering your resources and then refining it into craftable materials. At its core, Albion offers weapon, armor, potion, and food crafting. And each of those core categories are broken up into multiple segments. An example of this is being a sword maker, which is broken down into different types of swords: broadswords, claymores, dual swords, and others. Now, the more you craft a particular item, such as a claymore, the more proficient you become at making claymores. Crafting is very deep, but it's not overly complex. Instead, it's the exact opposite. This is a game that you could play purely as a life skiller if you are into that. Next, let's talk PvP. First up, you have open world PvP, as previously mentioned. This takes place in yellow, red, and black zones, with the last zones being full loot PvP. Next, you have dueling if you want to make wagers and flex 1v1. Then you have Hellgates, which is a PvE PvP experience where you run a dungeon and you can either invade or be invaded by hostile players. Depending on what zone you're in, this can be a full loot PvP activity or not. Next, you have 20v20 Guild v Guild, and these are fought for guilds to gain control of one of the 6 major cities. And then lastly, you have arenas, which can be groups of 2 to 5 to battle it out in a non-loot match where all gear scores are equal. That just about sums up the content for Albion. As you can see, the content definitely caters to PvP. While the PvE have their fair share of content, it's not nearly as robust. Let's check out old school RuneScape and RuneScape 3. So I'm going to go ahead and group these together because more or less the content makeup is the same, with the exception of a few skills and activities. RuneScape does have a great offering when it comes to PvE and PvP. I would say that for PvP, old school RuneScape is probably more active than RuneScape 3. However, when it comes to the PvE, the offerings are just about the same. For my PvE players, if you are into questing, raids, skill leveling, crafting, or things like PvE completionist, RuneScape has all of that. For my PvP players, if you like large scale, small scale, full loot, and a few others, RuneScape has that as well. Let's start with the PvE. Questing in both old school RuneScape and RuneScape 3 are some of the best experiences I think you will have in an MMO. Most MMOs have one main linear quest with a bunch of fetch and kill quests to go along with it, and that's the exact opposite here. Questing in RuneScape tells many different stories that may tie into one another in future quests. Questing has tangible benefits such as opening up shortcuts, being able to access new areas, and a ton more. Raids are offered in both games, normally ranging from 5 to 10 players, going through defeating mobs, doing mechanics, and defeating a final boss. Next, let's talk about the skills you have to level. Now, it's important to note that RuneScape 3 has all of the skills that old school RuneScape has, plus a few more. However, the basis of them are the same when it comes to what they do and how you level them. So, old school RuneScape has a total of 23 skills to level, while RuneScape 3 has a total of 27. I won't name them all, but here are a few they share in common: thievery, agility, attack, strength, herb lore, and a bunch of others. Now, all these skills provide the player with something tangible to aid them in game. An example of this is agility. A player with a high agility level may be able to take shortcuts in the world to make their path much quicker, while a player with a low agility level may not be able to access that same shortcut and will have to take the long way around. In old school RuneScape, all skills can be leveled up to 99, while in RuneScape 3, all skills go to 120. Next, let's talk crafting. This does tie into skill leveling as well, as you'll be able to level skills such as smithing, fletching, cooking, and a few more. Now, crafting in RuneScape doesn't have as big of an impact as it does in Albion, but it's still a meaningful part of the game to make money, and if you want it to be a pure life skiller, you can do that as well. Let's jump over to PvP. PvP in RuneScape takes place normally in one of three formats: Wilderness PvP, Castle Wars, and the Duel Arena. Wilderness PvP takes place on a specific part of the map. This is the PvP where you need to be the most careful, as you can lose your items upon death. In the wilderness, there are no rules, and you must be wary of your surroundings because you can be ganked by multiple people. Next is Castle Wars, which is basically a large-scale capture the flag. This is considered one of the mini-games in RuneScape, so you don't have to worry about losing your gear here. And the last one is the Duel Arena, which is 1v1, where you can set match parameters and wager an obscene amount of gold. And that's about it. Now, I couldn't mention it all here, but RuneScape has a ton of explorability and extra content to engage in, such as minigames and others, and you won't find any shortage of things to do here. And I think that's about it. I think we've compared all of the major factors that you would look at when comparing both of these games, so let's go ahead and wrap this up. Overall, I think we have 3 really good MMOs that have a ton of content, but each have their pros and cons. As always, I really think it comes down to personal preference. If you want the PvP experience, are into full loot PvP, ganking, zergs, and things like that, Albion will be the best fit. If you want that great balance of PvP and PvE, Old School RuneScape is the best spot in my opinion. And lastly, if you want more of the PvE experience and maybe can't stomach how Old School RuneScape looks, I think RuneScape 3 here is the best option. And I think it's worth mentioning as well when comparing Old School RuneScape to RuneScape 3 is that PvP is just about non-existent in RuneScape 3, so that's something to keep in mind. Now, I know I could have went a lot more in depth, but I really wanted to keep this surface level as I didn't want to be here all day. This video really just serves as a basis if you're trying to decide between the 3. As for me, I have played countless hours of Old School RuneScape and RuneScape 3, while Albion is the one I have the least amount of time in. But I can tell you with my experience in all 3, Old School RuneScape is my preference. For me, in general, I would choose Old School RuneScape and RuneScape 3 over Albion, as I just feel like they have much more to offer in terms of player choice. And something that I look for in an MMO is a really engaging game world, which is something that RuneScape offers, and Albion doesn't really offer me that. But enough of what I think. I'd love to know what y'all think in the comments below. What did you think about this versus video? Which game do y'all like better and why? Have you ever played these games? Let me know, but that's all I got for now. I hope y'all enjoyed the video, and if y'all did, please drop a like and a sub. It goes a long way, and I got more coming. Catch y'all next time.